we're at an era similar to on the verge of industrial revolution. And this is where I think, your podcast and sort of what you're doing, disseminating the information is really important, because if you actually think about the world where electricity and the railroads and like a factory that hasn't like fully kicked in, but we are seeing this built up and we're like, well, guys, like this is coming and we need to explain to you what's coming.
Hello, Brian. How's it going?
Good. Hey, Mickey. Good to be here. Good to see you in
Thank you.
health, good spirit.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time and thank you for being part of the Autonomous Business Podcast. Today we're hosting Bryan Kim, partner at A16Z, who's leading consumer AI applications and specifically invested in companies such as ElevenLabs, which we all know very well, Function Health, which is doing incredibly well. And Bryan is focusing a lot on the future of agentic consumer experience. So that's what we're going to cover today. Thank you so much, Bryan.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So, Bryan, I want to go, we don't have a lot of time, so I want to dive as deep as we can. And I want to ask you probably the most, fascinating question that every entrepreneur, probably every investor is asking themselves right now. What did you change about your perspective of investing in exceptionally incredible entrepreneurs, and what does it mean in the world of AI?
Oh, man. That's a great question. It's interesting. I've been an investor here at A16Z for, call it almost 6 years. And it like almost splits in half. There's like a pre-ChatGPT moment, and there's like a post-ChatGPT moment. And it's like, call it 3 years, what have you. Before that moment, I think, it was an era of cloud, SaaS, mobile, and we're looking at all these products that are doing really well. And that was interesting. What I would say, Mickey, in that world was cloud, mobile, and SaaS of the world were, I would say maybe like a decade or two in its maturity curve. And of course, there's still a lot to do. But it was a known problem set. There are net new innovation on the edges that's happening. But it was a relatively known space, so that the company, the founders that I felt really compelled by, were the ones who like took their time, built a beautiful and amazing product that really, really solved the key problems for enterprise or customers, and sort of like iterated in a way that made sense and had metrics that made sense. And those could be, and I sort of pioneered a little bit of this at A16Z by like benchmarking the hell out of all the metrics to say, oh, if retention as we define it goes above X, that is outstanding. And we must understand the product. And insofar the founder had a good vision and a product taste, that's great. Let's back that come. So that was like one version of how I thought about investing. And it's changed. AI really, really did change a lot of things. And I think there are a couple of reasons. Reason number one of that change in my mind is because, and we all feel this, and I'm sure you feel this running Enso every day. Shit's changing so much, so fast, every day, every week.
Crazy.
Even imagine OpenClaw came out, like not even 2 months ago? I would say less than 2 months ago.
Right.
It is now the most used open source project in history. Not 2 months, like it's insane. It's changed how people really think about a lot of things, so much so that it is a key topic in NVIDIA's GTC. That was like 2 days ago or some such thing.
Right. Jensen said that this is an incredible technology that will define future of agents.
I'm like, this is very cool, and we're going to build Nemo Claw. Like, the speed of change has been so fast that's like change number one. Change number two, in my mind, is the underlying technology. And I often sort of actually really think about this, where it is possible that we're at an era similar to on the verge of industrial revolution. And this is where I think, your podcast and sort of what you're doing, disseminating the information is really important, because if you actually think about the world where electricity and the railroads and like factories that hasn't like fully kicked in, but we are seeing this built up, and we're like, well, guys, like this is coming, and we need to explain to you what's coming. It's very helpful. So I think we're on the verge of this really, really big changes where, as your podcast suggests, autonomous business. What does that mean? What does that like self-driving, business mean? And it doesn't even sound ridiculous anymore.
Right.
Lovable, when it came out a year and a half ago, said last piece of software. That sounded ridiculous back then. It doesn't now. So again, the underlying technological shift is massive. So like those are some of the changes. And because of those changes in my mind, Mickey, the type of founders that I'm now attracted to are couple, they sort of possess a couple qualities. Quality number one is they're on the bleeding edge, right? So when OpenClaw, Moltbook, or one of these things come out, they're able to talk about it. They're so curious about it. They have a freaking Mac Mini. They set up a bunch of workflow. It like seeped into one of your private thing, and you're freaking out. And what do I do? And panicking and what have you. And if it works, you're like writing a long tweet about what you did and how it worked. And that's interesting. And I think the bleeding edge is important because the capabilities that are being unlocked right now is nothing short of miraculous. So now what I'm looking for is, number one, founders who have that intense curiosity, agency, and a little bit of technical acumen to be at that forefront.
So basically a builder who's extremely curious about the world of AI.
Exactly. And then, this is another important part for me personally, is someone who can translate that and say, I'm going to build this into a product. And here's where it's different. Prior to the AI, ChatGPT moment, if you will, Mickey, if the product didn't quite make sense, if it wasn't polished, if it wasn't like doing the thing I thought it should be doing, right? Let's say somebody launches a product that helps you build businesses. Cool. Or let's take Lovable, like build a website. If the end product isn't beautiful and fully finished, I can have so many questions. I'm like, oh, it's a prototype. Nobody serious is going to work. Look at this. Like the retention isn't even that great, nor do we actually even have the information. It's just not, it's not beautiful. It's not doing the thing they say they want to do. I am a lot more forgiving, if that's the word, about that right now, because shit's not supposed to work. We're very, very early, and we're actually appealing to the early adopters anyways.
Right.
So it is okay. It is okay that is kind of wobbly. It is okay that we can poke into it and say, like, this product doesn't do ABC. I'm like, of course it doesn't. But isn't it magical that, a version of it could happen? And so I became a lot more forgiving on the quality, or the, what's the word that I'm looking for?
Maturity, probably maturity.
Maturity, polishedness, the sort of, the cleanliness of the product, and a lot more around, does it embodying and incorporating the latest and greatest? And if it's doing something very unique, and the founder is encouraged by this to distribute it and make noise about it and write about it, I get very, very encouraged by it. So like, that's the type of founder archetype, Mickey, that I now am drawn to.
Got it. Let me challenge that a little bit, just a little bit as a founder. I hope you don't mind.
There's no point having a stance if there's no other part of other side of it.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in the VC tech space for many years, and I mean, when you're investing in the person or in a vision, there's some type of kind of just projected kind of path that you're thinking of the company going through. And you have, okay, so this company will do X, and then we'll raise their A or whatever, the B, whatever. Today, when things are changing like every 2 months, you just said, about OpenClaw, which was basically released less than 2 months ago. How do you evaluate, the very even short form future of a company when you're investing in it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, and we struggle with it, right? We like always question ourselves, like, is Claude gonna just like launch something and like wipe this
eat
out?
it alive?
It's possible. It's possible. Now, that's why, Mickey, I think one of the things that I sort of mentioned is like the founders on the intense curiosity, the forefront of it, the edges of it, because they're going to keep riding that edge of the wave to say, oh, I'm going to get wiped because the other thing's coming. I need to pivot is almost a wrong word now.
Right.
Right. Like
Adjust.
it's not even like, oh, I'm going to pivot my business. It's more like, okay, a net new thing came out, right? Like an open source, like autonomous building product that I can use and talk to it on my Telegram and WhatsApp and tell it to go do things as if it's like like a manager of sorts that I hired. That's out now. So I'm actually going to build the company and product differently. So, I think the important thing in sort of evaluating founders are now, how quickly are you moving in terms of a net new things coming out and really thinking through like, how do I apply this to my business? And does that actually change the direction of where I need to go differently? And the folks who are continuing building out. So one good example perhaps is, I would take Matty from ElevenLabs and Matty and Piotr from ElevenLabs as an example where people still think about the company as like a leader in audio AI, right?
Right.
This is correct. They are. They like own audio AI. That's great. We love it. And they're sort of working with many different companies, and very happy to see that. They're sort of evolving the business to have agents side of business. And the founders made a conscious decision many moons ago that that's the direction they wanted to take. That it is a net new future that we're entering, and this is not their words but mine, like more of a decade of agents. So that they wanted to sort of build a top of what they have to evolve the business into agent side of business as well. And it's getting a lot of traction, and I'm very excited and encouraged by it. So, if you actually distill that down, they're probably ahead, right? This is many moons ago that they said like agents going to be really important. We're going to actually build this side of the business. And, we're just seeing, starting to see the fruit of that decision. So I think if I sort of bring that back to the type of founders that we get really excited about, are the ones who see the wave coming. I'm like, oh, we're going to adapt our business to it and continue building on top of what we have with speed, rigor, and great execution.
I think you brought up that probably the best moat in this new world that we're in is speed, which I totally agree with, because the ability to just quickly adapt to any possible change and push the gas as much as possible.
My boss Mark had a much more eloquent version of it, which is like OODA loop or some such thing, where like you experiment very quickly and go, and I think that's probably correct.
Cool.
Better way to say it.
This is super cool. I want to touch a little bit. You brought up Claude, and we talked about ElevenLabs, and we talked about adaptive founders. And I think there's a huge, especially in the VC space, there's a huge debate around horizontal versus vertical approaches to AI applications. And I think we had this before, me and you as well. And I'm curious, it's been 2 years since this world started growing. Claude is eating pieces of the stock market now with the cybersecurity space, and then the SaaS calypse. How do you say that?
Call it. It's that. Same as you. I have a hard time.
Yes. So when the SaaS stocks are dropping as well, how do you look at the idea of one software Swiss knife that can do many things, just such as the LLMs, as opposed to professional, verticalized, specific experiences to specific segments of users in this crazy space that changes so much?
Yeah, it's an incredible debate, right? Horizontal, vertical, what's working, what's not working. Horizontals are hard to defend intellectually, right? To say like, oh, but it has these moats and it's going to do blah, blah, blah. Like untrue, right? Like Claude, of the world, or large model companies can descend for it. And, because their default trained on everything horizontal feels less defensive. Vertical has many, things going for it. Like, oh, there's a system of record, and if you collect that, if you understand the workflow, people will get used to it. If you connect to all the tools that people use, it'll sort of be hard to rip out. And I think that's all true. But then you also have, and this applies to both horizontal and vertical. We'll just use agents as an example because it's so interesting, right? They now have the ability to rewrite their program.
Right. Which is the most incredible part.
Just I don't know if we fully grok the implication of it, right? Like they have the ability to go find tools and add itself to it, whether it's MCP or CLI, it doesn't matter. They like know how to go augment themselves.
Right.
And I'm like making it sound like it's like a human being. Of course it's not, but the tool knows how to go actually make itself better, rewrite the program, shapeshift almost into the use case that you're using for, which may be horizontal, may be vertical. So I think the threat, if you will, applies to both, which gets to a point where what do I think which one will work? My sense is that both will work. And both require a deep sense of staying vigilant, staying on the bleeding edge to actually understand what's happening and continue iterating. So, if I think about certain, like on a horizontal side, I would just say, would products like Lovable eventually work? Like it is already working, right? It's a horizontal. Every can use it, and there's a debate around like what is the mode or defensibility of that. Well, insofar as today, it's been speed and like ability for people to continue to build on it and having more examples and what have you. And I think that is in a way, and the brand and the sort of mind share that it gets is also sort of a mode. Right. Well, that's like one version of it. And in the vertical, you can go into very, very deep things, right? Like auto debt collection using voice AI. Great. That's so verticalized. Was it ever going to work? Would Claude take over? I'm like, maybe, sure. Like that risk applies to everything these days, which is a difference. I think like vertical one was like a lot more, protected before, but now we're seeing like it can actually get, encroach upon. When I think about those type of businesses, insofar as you're delivering value, delivering results, and consistently delivering results for the end customers of yours, I actually think, forget, which business model will work for a second. If there's an entity or you're working with a team whose business is to bring you results again and again, and you don't really care how they're doing it, whether it's agents or humans or some such thing at a margin that makes sense to you and them, like that's a good business. And I think we'll see more and more products that employ agents that go help the end customers, again, whether it's horizontal or vertical. And then there will be continuous debate on, is there a moat? Is there a moat? Is there a moat? So the debate, the result, we'll have to see. But I strongly continue to believe a purpose-built, very driven founders who are deadly focused on their customer base will continue to have a great place in the world of startups.
Cool. I do want to pick your brain a little bit. I assume you're seeing many different types of founders and companies and products. And, the world keeps on discussing the idea of SaaS is changing, and we're like observing a new notion of software. I would like to pick your brain a little bit about what do you think is it going to be? I assume this is a speculation. We can't know, and tomorrow we're probably going to see GitHub exploding with a new thing. But given that it's not like SaaS anymore, and you can build your own things, and like, where are we going?
It's funny. I thought about that a lot, and I don't have like a strong opinion. I'm like, SaaS, like end of SaaS is correct or not correct. My background, I have a lot of like financial background. I used to be a CFO, used to be a banker for a bit. So I sort of started thinking about it. Like the way people value things are essentially DCF, right? At the end of the day, you're looking at the future cash flows and discounting back, and growth played a huge role, and all of that goes in there. So when I think of SaaS, there are two things that come up in my mind. One is, what is the version of a payment type that we're expecting, business model type that we're expecting from SaaS, and one is per seat. So, my theory number one is that we will move from per seat to per outcome. And in the world of agents, and we'll talk about it a little more maybe, is like, how do you actually price these things?
Great.
But I believe it'll be based on largely outcome-based models. So we're shifting into that. Then the second part I'm thinking around is like, well, agents are now going to run around and autonomously do stuff. And it is likely possible that the marginal cost of outcome continues to go down. Which then from a customer standpoint, I don't want, if the marginal cost of like serving me is continuing to go down, and I also know my other alternative is trying to go maybe vibe code one of that and like actually use it all the way, maybe I won't. I will demand lower price, and therefore the gross in revenue and the margin profile and the future cash flow may be impacted.
Right.
So when you actually discount that back, what does that do to overall valuation? And I think that's probably what the public market's doing. But again, like I'm a very early stage private market investor. Don't really know what the markets, public markets valuing things at. But those two are the ways I thought about it, where one is business model change and two is would these change impact the future cash flows of the business and the possibility of it.
Right. So then you're not looking at this from an application experience. You're looking at this purely from an economic perspective and saying,
as investors, we do have to think about, a little bit of
true.
From an application standpoint, I do think, look, like if you go to the top, companies like Stripes or Ramp, what have you, I bet they're still using a lot of the SaaS products, and I bet that it'll take a while, if ever, for them to say, you know what, we don't want to use these system of record tools.
Right. We'll just vibe code Salesforce. Exactly. I can say that.
Let's vibe code Salesforce, or I don't want to pay Zoom. Let's like vibe code a video product. I'm like, you guys have things to do.
Right. That's true. I want to tell you that I had a conversation today with a customer at Enzo. We moved a little bit mid-market, so our customers now are a little larger than what we used to discuss, and it's very exciting. And one of our customers, who's they're at about $80 million in annual recurring revenue, and we have one of our products is an autonomous an SEO or GEO engine that basically does everything from it's like a bunch of agents that do all the way from research to actually creating content, so you can outsource to agents all of your part of content marketing and etc. And they were asking me, why am I not pricing this based on an outcome? And one of the things that I realized is that it's extremely hard to do that when we're selling a retainer. We're saying, hey, use this as a replacement of an agency or an SEO agency in this case, or an alternative. But then I want to dive deep a little bit with you about the pricing side of it, because it's extremely hard to calculate economics of your customer or economics of specific pieces of industry and price it this way. So there are obvious examples such as customer support. So price per ticket is easy. But then when it comes to price per lead, for example, that becomes harder because lead in every industry is a completely different value. So how do you look at pricing agents when hiring them?
That's a really good point. Look, maybe I have like two theories. Again, like I'm full of theories, but one theory is that let's look at the beginning of the internet ad market, the sort of the paid acquisition market, right? We were in a CPA or like CPM basis for so long, no? Like price per impression, price for so apply for eyeballs essentially, right? I remember, I think we priced ads on a CPM basis for almost a decade, maybe a little less.
Probably. Then we had CPC, which was like innovation.
Yep.
And now it's
and then
cost
like
per
CPI,
action.
And then, eventually it went to a place where, well, I wanted to do X, and you can now bid on your goals. Right? And that took at least a decade. From moving from, hey, like I'm gonna price on outcome, and we went through the layers of metric that are a little ahead of that. so that, the industry can actually price and get used to and start understanding how to measure the outcome, how to price the outcome.
Right.
So my sense today is just like, you said you're on a retainer and you're sort of saying like, oh, maybe it would be based on number of agents, maybe it'd be based on number of content pieces that I generate. It's very unclear, and you might be unsatisfied, but this is not really, being priced on outcome, then you would be correct. But then I do draw some parallel to the beginning of the, digital ad industry, where we all knew that's where we're going to go, except we had to go through all the layers of the cake to essentially get to that place where we're like, okay, like now we have the data schema and the right number of tools to be able to price at exactly what you want. And I think that side of the industry, there's a lot of opportunities there to actually start, measuring like just how efficient and how productive are these AI tools.
Incredible. I think, it's so hard to measure those type of units, just generally.
Absolutely.
I'm extremely fascinated by just the idea of even having the ability to price per outcome for customers, because that's the closest to value you can ever get.
Exactly. And what did the digital ad industry do? It expanded, it exploded.
Right.
Because insofar as that I know the dollar that I'm paying is giving me dollar plus X, I'm good.
And I think even the entire TAM of like the advertising industry grew because of that. Like
exactly. If I know I'm gonna get X and I know I'm gonna pay less than X, like I'm good. Let's keep going. Right. And so when the ecosystem and the customers have satisfaction and understanding of that, I think the economy and the market becomes even larger. And that sort of may be an interesting parallel to where we are with agents today.
Bryan, since many of our listeners and readers in this specific episode will be founders and investors, I want to take you a little bit back to the founder side, and I want to ask you the following question. I assume, this is an assumption, that because the cost of building stuff just went down to basically zero, you see much more competition in different clusters of different products and stuff like this. And I would like to hear your take on this. How do you as a founder compete with other founders who are equipped with the exact same tools in those extremely dense areas?
That's such an interesting question. They say, the future is already here, is just unevenly distributed. So again, going back to the type of founders who find those tools at the edges that, sure, it is in the public sphere, but you got to look for it, right? So one is, yes, cost of building is coming down. But even today, if you ask founders who are building, I'm like, this sounds like such a DC question. I'm like embarrassed to ask, but how are you using agents in your building? But how are you doing that? And some founders would have like a very different set of answers, right? One would be it's writing 90% of my codes, and I have like I review everything, blah, 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 but I feel good about it. Versus the other people might be, oh, we have a team of 10 and we're starting to adopt agents, and some of the non-coders are now becoming now doing code commits, so we're very excited about that. That's like a different level right now. So I do think there's a level of adoption that is different. The second thing I would say is creativity and craft still matters tremendously, I think. Again, this is a weird thing to say, but OpenClaw, like Pete, I sort of was listening to his like long podcast on like how he built it and etc. Like a lot of interesting things come out where OpenClaw stitched together a lot of things that already existed.
Right.
He didn't necessarily come up with like a net new model of like, here is a next generation of model that I trained and is doing blah, blah, blah. That's not what he did, right? He tinkered. He calls it an overnight success, but like he tinkered for years and stitched things together in an incredibly compelling way and put it out there.
Right.
And so my sense is that there are infinite permutation of things that you can connect to make it very, very unique. And that's not too different from the prior generation where creativity and craft still matters a ton. What's interesting is the set of nuts and bolts that you want to use to create the thing is changing so much, and there's so many of them that you need to understand what those things are, if that makes sense. So I still think the creativity, the tinkering, the craft, and being on the edge matters so much.
Is there a specific space or like a specific category that today like looks extremely, you know, obvious in terms of like size or growth or CAGR or whatever, that you think will completely disappear in like 5 years because of AI? And if there's the opposite, like a specific category that you're curious about that you think will explode in the future, but we didn't yet, observe it or like discover it.
This is not the house view, and I don't know. Obviously, is the answer, because if I did, like, I'd maybe I'd be a hedge fund person. But as I think about what looks obvious today is all the workflow that were filled with human and time that can now be moved to AI, right? So customer support is a good example. Debt collection is another good example. The legal, research and things like that just took up time are really good examples. And I think those are the, obvious is the wrong word, but those are the first phase of, adoption, if you will, that I think looks obvious and people are very excited about. It's my view, Mickey, that those will work wonderfully, actually. And maybe, just continuing on a little bit, I think thinking through what may not be obvious today is, it's so interesting. We're continuing to think about the layers of AI. We're in an application layer. That's why I invest. But there's also models. But these models, if you look at their, economic profile, a lot of it's going to buying chips and data centers, would then need energy. And so there's a lot of layers of what's happening, and what seems a little less obvious today may be innovations on the even lower side of things, where what are some of the great ways to help generate energy at a smart way? And again, I'm saying this not as a house view because I don't know that really well, but I think those are the areas that I look at. I'm like, wow, like that's just intellectually fascinating.
Are there areas that you have not been investing in just before AI? Like, for example, some of the venture capitalists I was in touch with recently said that they started investing in energy, for example, which you just brought up,
There you go.
which was like a completely new thing for them. Just because AI, is eating software, probably in this case. Is there any specific like categories that you started investing in that are, just new to you and you're excited about?
Yeah, no, I would say I haven't made an investment yet, but I've sort of put out a call, and I've been spending a lot of time thinking about it, and this is a case of me just following the founders. There's always a saying in sort of VC that hardware is hard.
Right.
And in my experience at Snapchat, building spectacles and glasses, whatever, like, I understand it's hard. It is hard. But Mickey, I've been meeting too many incredible founders excited about building hardware, excited about the new form of what enables AI to do, excited about potentially the future robotics, etc., where I am forced to keep an extremely open mind. Who am I to say, these people are way smarter than me? Who am I to say, oh, well, hardware's always been hard? I'm like, well, all these amazing smart people are going and building things. So I've been sort of watching them and observing what they're building, and going back to maybe horizontal and vertical debate a little bit, I've been very excited about very pointed solutions. Not like, oh, it can like be your friend and do all these things for you. I'm like, nah, like that's too general. Like, let's actually focus on like a distinct pain point that people might want and how hardware may, address that. So I've been spending a little bit more time there, and it's becoming more interesting, mostly because the upstream of what venture capitalists look at, which is where are the smart talents spending their time, has been expanding.
Got it. And when you're talking about hardware, is it like a specific type of hardware, or is it like still AI type of
Yeah.
hardware? Is it like
I'll give you a bunch of examples that are pointed solutions, right? Example, Exhibit A. What if you put an AI device in a cow and
in a
figure out
cow?
in a cow. It's a big industry. And
Oh
figure
wow.
out, their longevity, their diseaseness, their health. Like, what is that now that you can do it so cheaply instead of like all these other sensors? Interesting.
Wow.
What is a wearable, but you can use it to connect to call help in like in a dangerous situations, right? Like if you do that and it's like essentially AI bodyguard, that's interesting. Recently there was a Twitter thing that went viral where there's a product called the Valence that there are a bunch of different listening devices maybe in the future, and this basically the founder is building a product that blocks those. Okay,
Wow.
like weird, specific, niche, but interesting. So I'm giving you examples of the hardwares that I am, very attracted to, because it's a very specific thing that I can very easily, well, not very easily, but I can see the future of, like if XYZ happens, like people will want, blockers and shields, There are other products like, products that track your brain EEG on the go and tells you what your mental clarity level is.
Wow.
So having invested in function health and know that there is a tremendous demand of people wanting to manage their own health,
Right.
what might be the next natural thing that people might want to manage? Brain. I do. So like, that's interesting. So there's a lot of those where it sounds a little far-fetched, maybe today, but you meet some of these founders who are incredible and talented, that are so enthusiastic about this that you start believing the future that they're painting.
This is incredible. I am super, super excited. I think, the problem I assume with hardware historically was the speed, because it just takes time to produce.
Absolutely.
And so it's extremely hard to grow fast because software is replicable. But, in the world of moat and how important this is to be somehow defensible, this is a great moat.
But Mickey, I worry about that still. They're like, oh, we're raising an A. I'm like, that's awesome. What do you have? I'm like, pre-orders. I'm like, cool. When is it coming out? Like in 6 months. I'm like, great. And I'm still getting used to that, right? Like, so doing the reps around understanding that has been an important part of, training. So
Right.
like I have this weird thing where I sometimes view each individual investor as like a model, a pre-trained model of sorts. So I keep thinking about what training data set that do I need to continue to sort of get better. So I'm obtaining more and more training data set in that module, if that makes sense.
This is incredible. Bryan, I know you're very much a numbers person, and you really are, you were talking a lot, at least when we were chatting before, about retention and how important those numbers are, and how important it is to understand at least somehow, specific numbers of or any proxy of customer satisfaction. And I'm trying to understand, there's a whole new world. We discussed a little bit of the AI agent space, and agents are using software today as themselves.
They
Just,
are.
you just
They
named it
are.
with like CLIs and like different libraries. Given the idea that we now have like mixed analytics in the world, where some of it is being used by bots and some of it is being used by people, how do you look at metrics in just general when you're looking into software specifically? I'm not talking about like, if measuring a cow is a very specific thing, but but in a specific case of like the software. Yeah.
That's such a good question, Mickey. And I actually had a mind of like trying to write about this because I'm actually lost. When agents start to use products, what does retention even mean? Like, what does engagement mean? What does any of these mean? And I think it's possible that it doesn't really mean anything, right? Like we need to actually come up with new things, because you can say as a a principle, a human that says, hey, I'm gonna use my agent, and let's say I have an OpenClaw bot. I named him Greg, so I have a Greg bot.
All right.
And I said, I spent 4 hours, like whatever, setting up Greg. And now Greg is running around doing things. Is telling me things on, WhatsApp and Telegram. That's great. What is my interaction and usage pattern of Greg? I don't know. I just told Greg to do things, and it's gonna go do things, and maybe it'll boil the ocean and like end up costing me a shitload of tokens, or maybe it won't. And how do you actually determine my interaction with a Greg bot? Is it whenever it texts me? Right? So I think what I am agreeing with you is that there is a new paradigm coming in terms of how to understand the usefulness of the product. And the thing that I've been thinking about, which of course is hard to measure, is output per token.
Oh wow! Like that's a very. How do you? What's an example for something like that?
No, because I told Greg to do something. It's going to go do something. I don't know what it's doing, but if I were to catalog the things that it did, it may be token. And again, like there may be better people out there was like, no, that's dumb. There are other metrics that you can track, but like I'm dumbing it down for normal-ish people like me to say, okay,
Right.
token, I understand that. Like it expended a bunch of token and like got XYZ done. What as a principle should I care about? Well, I care about whether it delivered me the output that I asked for. I also care about how much it cost me, Greg. I'm calling it Greg because it's my bot. But I care about how much it cost me, right? Because it may have done and like random stuff and like, oh, like I used so much token, your API bill is now $1,000. And all I did is I delivered you some paragraphs to put on Twitter. I'm like, you dumb Greg. What have you done? Right? So I'm dissatisfied with the product. So the way I've been thinking about this, Mickey, is like at the end of the day, especially with agents, why do you have agents? Because you want a result. You want something done, right? And then ultimately what I would care about, I think, is the cost and efficiency of that thing being done. And token to me is a proxy of that. I'm early in the thinking, but I think what I am agreeing with you is I don't like the metrics going to be a little doozy to think about what really matters, right? And then, therefore maybe the earliest and dumbest metric to track that makes sense for all of us is like, are people paying for it? And what's the retention of the subscriber? I'm like, cool, like that makes sense. That's like a level one easy metric that everyone will understand.
Good enough basics.
Got it, understand. But how do you determine the earlier indication of whether people really love the thing? And that probably is how many outputs that they're generating. And I may be curious for the margin profile of the company to say, well, are your agents architected correctly in a way that expends less token? And maybe that's an interesting measure as we think forward.
I am fascinated by even the idea that we'll have to reinvent all of it. It's probably the most fascinating time in the history of tech.
It is crazy. So like for me to say like, oh, like again, like I used to be this retention guy. Like the first 3 years of my life was easier, like, oh, retention, that's awesome. Once in a decade, let's go. And now, they're like, oh, retention's not great. I'm like, but yet.
Bryan, I want to ask you like personally, and I assume, a little bit about your colleagues as well. How much time do you spend playing with those tools? And like, open close of the world and etc. And how much does it build your next kind of crave when you're investing in stuff?
Yeah, so we have a theory, and I think, I can speak a little bit for my colleagues too, where we may be at the verge of industrial revolution and using these, right? And we talk about agents, right? Like, oh, you're just going to do this, that. And, we can read about it on Twitter and, have a theory and like write thought pieces, etc. But a lot of my colleagues and myself included are operators turn investors.
Right.
And one thing that I think I take from being an operator is that, and I do this like hand motion quite a bit, like when you've been an operator, you got to like touch and feel the product a little bit. And you can like comment on like a bunch of stuff. But the real operators who like build products from the ground up and know that, devil's in the detail, the nuances matter. It's hard to develop an instinct without touching the damn thing. So I know this is Greg should be connected, but a bunch of my colleagues have these. Like we're doing it, and we're connecting a bunch of different things, and we're trying and failing and sharing best practices and sharing like different prompts and like autonomous workflow that we built on and like being inspired by it. I'm like, you did what? That's so cool. And being in that flow helps us continue to be in that mind space and to, I think, develop instinct. So again, going back to, my weird theory of looking at every investor as like a pre-trained model, we need new data, right? We need new data to continue to invest really well. And what are the data sources? And I would almost say like us doing the damn thing is like acquiring a very specific type of data needed to make informed decisions. I would say meeting and spending so much time with founders that are in the cutting edge again and again delivers us more and more net new training data that helps us think through, okay, we're being like almost oiled on the street to say like, oh, like, that's what's happening. And we continue to update our priors as to what could happen. So it's my belief that it is extremely important. And, there's a funny meme that one of our friends, Tucker Novak at Banana Capital, put out there where, whenever there's a new product that drops, A16Z partners, they all like huddle up and try the thing. I take pride in that.
So this is basically a cultural thing at A16Z, not only.
I think it is. Like, try the damn thing and like actually be with the people that you're trying to back.
Super cool. The last part of this episode, we do have some VC investors both from Israel and from the world will be listening to this episode, and I want to, just a little bit of your thoughts about, how does it look like? Because VC has a very specific, like a venture capital has a very specific math that supports it. You gotta get to an extremely large company in order to make exceptional returns and etc. But in a world where founders had some incentive to chase this type of goal as well, just at the basic of it, how do you look at this now when, again, everything is so simple, or not simple, but accessible to build? Yeah, what does it look like, this future of this incredible funding engine and innovation?
I think one thing I've noticed is that growth is accelerating. I just have like a series of logos in my mind of like companies that went from like 0 to 100 in a year.
Crazy.
It's difficult to imagine, honestly. And we're just talking startups, right? We're not even talking about the labs who are adding billions. We're not even talking NVIDIA, who says we have orders for trillion dollar chips. I don't know what that looks like. Like, it's hard for my brain to even imagine trillion. So we're in this weird world where I think demand for intelligence outstrips the current supply. And I think that's an interesting way to think about it, right? Like industrial revolution, all of a sudden, one could have said, oh, like electricity, light bulb, or what have you, like that's cool, but, is it a better candle? And then we may look at an agent and be like, oh, is that a slightly better computer? Maybe. But the achievable value of these things are a little harder to estimate and like see from the prior generation, if that makes sense. And so my theory is that, intelligence is similar to electricity, where there is an infinite demand potentially of this thing that is almost like blocked because we need to make the damn intelligence and for that energy, etc. And because the potential demand is infinite, any route into that intelligence layer that makes sense for people are buying, and they're being fast, and they're using the damn thing too. So I think almost as like a VC now, it's like a weird word. Anyways, investor, the end market size or the customer pool may be stronger than ever. And therefore, we're bracing for it. We're excited for it. And it's frankly never been a more exciting and busier time to be an investor. I am drowning in news. I am also trying to catch up,
I had a conversation with an executive of a very large company not a while ago. We discussed the idea of, generated code replacing developers or whatever it means. And he brought up, he's a professor and he's an incredible person, and he brought up a very interesting kind of observation. He said, we as people, we tend to think in limited terms. Like there's limited workforce, there's limited intelligence, there's limited market space. And he brought up like 3 or 4 different examples of how when new technology arrived, it almost quadrupled the demand because so much more was possible. And I think what you just said is fascinating, because this actually means that the need for funding innovation now will become 10x larger than it ever been, just because the amount of innovation that we can create is incredible.
That's a theory, and I feel privileged to be in the space working with founders. Again, like if my cracked theory is correct, where maybe intelligence is like electricity and that will enable a bunch of things, I feel very privileged to be in the space of being able to work with founders at this time. And I also feel very privileged to see some legends in the industry pounding the pavements. And yes, that's competitive and that's whatever, but I look at that and I see it as a privilege. Like, good running with you, sirs. This is great. And I know we're all running because love of the game and love of what's happening right now.
Bryan, I really appreciate your time today, and thank you so much for covering all of those incredible aspects, even though we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow morning, and that's what's exciting so much about what we're doing from both sides of the spectrum. But I really appreciate you being here on the Autonomous Business Podcast, and thank you, Forbes Israel, for the partnership and for the distribution to all of your readers and your incredible community. And Bryan, is there anything you wanna share, last thing, with entrepreneurs and Israeli companies that will be listening to this?
Yeah, of course, Mickey. Thanks for having me. Thanks for Israel. And I know this is a good time. And that your alarm went on when we're talking. It's like that. So I am very inspired by the things of doing and continue to build, even when situation are very challenging. And I'm very for your ecosystem. You have been building companies and can't wait to see what comes.
Thank you so much for those warm words. I was touched. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mickey. Thanks for having me.